So to get started, what are love languages all about? First of all, I based this on a book. You can definitely go and check it out. It's called Love Languages in the Workplace. I read this years ago, and since then it's really stuck with me on communicating your appreciation for others in meaningful ways. Obviously, this is big within the ERG space because we want to show ERG leaders that we appreciate the work that they're doing at our company. But are we doing that the right way? Are we speaking to them in their preferred love language? We'll talk about what the 5 love languages are. And today we're really talking about how organizations can express their appreciation for ERG leaders. But just know in future episodes, there are deeper versions of this where you can discuss how ERG leaders can express their appreciation for their members. And even from ERG leader to ERG leader, how you can really implement things that'll help them express their appreciation to each other. So this gets way deeper. Right now, we're really talking about how the organization expresses that appreciation for them. In the book, they start off talking about the difference between recognition and appreciation. This is just something really quickly that I wanted to touch on because it was such an interesting point. So they said that recognition is about behavior. It's more so saying because you did this thing, you're getting rewarded for it. Where appreciation, it affirms a person's value as a person. It's not just about performance. Recognition was one way, a top-down approach, where it's from someone who is higher up, giving recognition to someone below them, where appreciation can be communicated in any direction. It also says in general, recognition is about improving performances and focuses on what's good for the company. Appreciation emphasizes what's good for the company and the person. So for you all who are leading ERG programs, appreciation is really the way to go. When it comes versus recognition, appreciation is not a one-size-fits-all approach. You cannot just implement one tactic of appreciation, one of these languages that we're going to talk about, as a blanket way to express your appreciation for ERG leaders. Even if that's your preferred love language, it might not be theirs. So individualization is the key to strong ERG leader appreciation strategy. That being said, they also had 4 rules to appreciation in general. The first rule is there are different ways to communicate appreciation. That's thing 1 that we have to acknowledge. There's no one size fits all. Rule number 2, individuals value certain love languages over others. Rule number 3, appreciation is most effective when it's spoken to someone in their most valued love language. And rule number 4, appreciation languages not valued by recipients will miss the mark. I really want you all to ask, does your current appreciation strategy miss the mark for some? And how have you seen that or not? Let's jump into the 5 love languages. In summary, they are words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and physical touch. And we're going to touch on all these, even though some of them might be like, I don't even know how that would apply in an appropriate manner. We'll get into it, I promise. We'll start off with words of affirmation. That's the first love language that they mentioned in the book. And they also mentioned that it's the most common form of appreciation typically in the workplace. Words of affirmation is when you're verbally affirming something about someone. Typically, people who value words of appreciation as their preferred love language really care about what others think of them, and not in a way, not overly necessarily, but they do really value others' opinions of them. It speaks about 3 methods that this can show up in terms of how we're using words of affirmation. The first one is recognizing people when they meet an accomplishment. So when ERG leaders have done something well, you want to be able to verbally praise them for that specific thing that they've done. And they really pointed out the need for specificity. It's not just, oh, good job or great meeting. It's now very targeted on what you liked about that thing. One of the phrases that they mentioned is situation, behavior, impact. So when you say this, you bring up the situation. I really appreciated how within that meeting, you asked questions in the chat to keep the audience engaged. I saw that after you did that, a lot of people felt more comfortable participating. So you're now combining not just, oh, you did a great job, which could be applied to anyone. You can say that as a blanket statement anytime. But now you're saying specifically what they did and the impact that you noted coming out of that. A second one that they brought up, affirmation for character. This is when you're affirming someone based on the traits that they possess. It focuses on the inner nature of a person in a variety of circumstances. Typically, if you're going to just compliment someone on that, like what we just mentioned, if they're in the meeting and they do something really well, something that people typically appreciate even more is you complimenting them based on who they are as a person. Once again, with this love language, you do not want to approach it with very blank statements that could apply to anyone. Visualization is the name of the game. So yeah, that's thing 2. So we talked about meeting an accomplishment, affirming them based on their character. So it can be you reaching out, you setting time to have a one-to-one conversation with them and just giving them some encouraging words ultimately. Something good to note with that even deeper is how you're going to approach one-to-one, because like I said, it can be in a meeting, but it could also be in a Slack or in an email. Individualization comes in again because this can vary across how the person's cultural background is or the different things that make up someone. So for instance, someone who's older, one of the trends that they were mentioning was that they might prefer a handwritten note, whereas Gen Zers may want something electronic. I know me personally, I prefer Slack over email. So if there was words of affirmation, I would definitely prefer it in that sense. How can you further individualize it so it meets their needs? Second setting that this can show up in, praise in front of others. So this could be in front of a supervisor, colleagues. For me, coming from a support organization, I know the value of having visibility in an organization. Where my goal was growing my career, visibility made all the difference. So getting a shout out in a company all hands meeting, or having someone even like senior to my manager advocate for me in front of my manager, that meant a lot to me. Whereas that might not be the case for others. But once again, we're really hammering this point home of individualization. And this is also why it's good to know the goals of ERG leaders in your program. This way you're able to better help them accomplish these goals with your appreciation strategy. Sharing positive feedback is another one. Let's just say that you do a community poll or whatever employee NPS survey where you're asking members what they like or don't like about the program. When members say, oh, I love this program, this is what keeps me here at the company, and this particular ERG, they do such a great job with X, Y, and Z, make sure that you share that feedback with them. That might be a form of words of affirmation that help them to feel more appreciated for the work that they do. An activity that they gave for words of affirmation, just to close, they said to think of someone at your company who, if they didn't do what they do, that your life would be a lot more difficult. Just think of one person. I'm sure everyone has that person who automatically comes to mind. Write down the actions that they do that you really appreciate and then send them a message. So that's a good way to sample into sharing words of affirmation in case that's not your regular form of showing appreciation. Moving into number 2, quality time. What does quality time mean in this case? It's showing someone that they're valued by giving them your most valuable resource, which is your time. In this case, talking first about focused attention. So this is kind of like this one-on-one time with someone. This is where you're showing genuine interest in someone else. You're not multitasking, you're focusing specifically on them, you're giving them your full attention. These can show up as like meaningful check-ins. So if you just put some random time on someone's calendar, you can keep it brief, but hey, I just wanted to check in on you, see how you're doing. That is a form of quality time that can really help someone to feel appreciated. Another one is quality conversation. So you, with a check-in, it might just be keeping it light, whereas a quality conversation goes a little bit deeper. In this case, it could show up as giving people time to speak with you, to share their ideas. Some tips when it comes to having quality conversations: when you listen, you want to use empathetic listening. You're not listening with the goal of fixing their problems. You want to maintain eye contact with them. Resist the impulse to interrupt them. Listen for their feelings and thoughts. What emotions is this person likely feeling? It actually gave a really cool hack with this too, is that once you kind of gauge how they're feeling, you can ask them. So I would imagine coming from this, you probably felt very frustrated. This way, they can then confirm, oh yeah, you got it exactly. And this shows that you were listening. I really like that point, and that's something I'm gonna work on implementing. But you want to affirm their feelings as well, even if you disagree with necessarily the solution or conclusion that they came to. I can imagine if I was in your exact shoes, I would feel that exact same way. So quality conversations is another aspect of appreciation within quality time. I know for me personally, this is my love language. My favorite aspect within quality time is shared experiences. I like to do stuff with people. So like conferences, dinners, it mentioned like sporting events, actually being able to get together with others and do something really speaks to me. The last one that they brought out is small group dialogue. So this could be good for organizations with large bodies of ERG leaders where it may be very difficult to do regular check-ins with individuals. Not saying that you never, definitely still incorporate that, but in case where it can't be as frequent as you would like, having these small groups, almost like small focus group type listening sessions, can be good. And it can also help to put people's guard down where they may not feel comfortable speaking directly to you and providing feedback. They might feel a little bit better if they have others in their presence and who kind of validate their emotions and their feelings. Something to note is that quality time, especially for remote leaders, may be particularly of value. If someone who doesn't normally get to come together with others, this might be a really strong love language that you want to consider and to implement. On the flip side, that people who value quality time hate feeling ignored or left out. That is another important point there too, because that speaks exactly to me. And notice here, once you identify what someone's love language is, you can also then identify how doing something wrong can make them feel. Now, personal story here, I will say not too long ago, I left an ERG leader out of an invite, totally by accident, was not on purpose at all. And when I spoke to them later, I can sense their aggravation with it. And I felt so bad. But now, when you put that together with how love languages show up, I can tell that that person, their love language was probably quality time. So by feeling left out or ignored, that really did the opposite of appreciation. It's very dangerous. Don't worry, we can come back from those situations, but it's good to identify what someone's preferred love language is. This way you can know how to rectify those situations. Okay. I already said quality time is my preferred love language. I loved when I went to Afrotech, that showed me one. It was just so many aspects of appreciation in that. That's also why I'm always down to talk to ERG leaders and program managers. And why I say all the time, feel free to slide in my DMs. We can set some time to talk about your ERG program, because I'm cool with talking to other people and having those interactions. That speaks to my love language. Therefore, it's the love language that I also like to provide. It's why I love seeing organizations have ERG leader summits and really cool experiences, even that the ERGs host them. And also likewise, it's also why I hate feeling left out. I also get that feeling of FOMO. So that's why I felt so bad when that happened with that ERG leader. But we learn, we turn L's into lessons here. That covers quality time. So acts of service. For people who value acts of service, it's more so don't tell me that you care, show me that you care. And actions speak louder than words. I'm just gonna say the ERG space needs more of this. We need to strongly lean into the acts of service aspect, especially for ERG leaders. They're volunteers who want to make the workplace better for their community. They want to make the world better for their community. So acts of service is so important, because how are we making it easy for ERG leaders to be able to execute on the thing that they want to do, the thing that they voluntarily gave their time to do? Monetary compensation or appreciation can technically be viewed as an act of service, especially for, once again, lesser paid leads, because in a sense, that's an act of service. When money is a bigger concern for people's lives, they value then when they get a monetary reward. Now we're going to talk about that later when we get to gifts, like how to approach this monetary piece. But I'll say that's why some people can have a really strong passion towards ERG leader compensation, because they realize what that can do for some ERG leaders, which I definitely respect. Things that companies can do to show their appreciation in an active service way towards ERG leaders will be to implement, guess what I'm going to say? You all probably already know because I talk about it every week. SOPs, standardized operating procedures, to implement these step-by-step guides that make it really easy for ERG leaders to be able to execute on their roles. This way, it takes all the think work, all the things that make it hard for them to do, for them to throw an event because they don't even know where to start. They don't even know how to reach out to a speaker, how to get them paid, for them to engage their community within Slack. What does that even mean? What does success look like? There is so much confusion and therefore frustration that exists being an ERG leader when things are not clearly outlined on how you're going to execute your role. So many organizations are missing this very basic component. Therefore, ERG leaders get frustrated. And unfortunately, that's when a lot of organizations lean in with the wrong love language, when really what they're asking for is help. They want these processes. They want data. Data is an active service. Giving your ERG leaders access to data, and I'm not talking about the D&I data, that's great, but that's like a V2. Even just the basics of understanding who they're reaching, percentages of the company that's interacted with their ERG, or departments that are more likely to interact with their ERG. When you give them the things that make it easier for them to be creative and come up with solutions on how they can resolve engagement within their ERG, that is an active service that you're probably missing. In some cases, I guess someone could even technically say that getting software like ERG management software is an active service as well. I still say you need processes in place, but software could also be an active service where it's saying, I'm making your job easier to execute on. But you still need processes and data, just throwing that in there. So it gave some tips on how to perform acts of service and when to. The tips are: ask before you help. Otherwise, it can actually create tension. Most people, now granted, when you ask before you help, will say no. But this is why it's good to just follow up a second time, not being pushy, but just be more specific. Well, I have 15 minutes. I'm glad to help you send out some messages. Would you like some? So asking in that way, where it's giving more specific ways on how you're going to help. This way the person doesn't have to overthink on like, okay, well, how are they going to, what are they comfortable doing? By you being specific, you're making it a lot easier for them to be able to accept and say yes. Another tip, don't assume that you know what they want or what they need. You need to ask questions in terms of how you can best help that person. Another tip, if you're going to help, do it their way. This is big for perfectionists. I'm a perfectionist, just in case you all didn't know. Don't offer to help and then use this as a time to try to show them all the better ways that they can be doing it. If you're helping them, you want to ask, how would you like me to do this? This way the person, it's already hard enough for a perfectionist to let someone else help them, but this way they'll feel a lot more at ease knowing that you have the instructions to execute. Now, funny enough, just throwing this out here, this also works largely in reverse. Notice how they became an ERG leader and they don't have clear instructions on how to execute. And you see how that can make the relationship a little harder. But we already talked about SOPs, but I had to plug that again because it needs to be said, because 96, 97, maybe even 99% of organizations don't have them. So that's why I keep saying them every single week. And hopefully you're starting to get the message and thinking, how can I create these SOPs? Anyway, also, if you're going to help, you have to see it through. You got to execute fully. There's a lot of distrust amongst ERG leaders and program managers, especially right now in this time where maybe there's been a lot of turnover with ERG program managers or with diversity leaders just in general who interact with the ERG program. Maybe there's been a lot of frustration due to the different change management and people coming in and they don't necessarily finish the role that they started. So now the ERG program has to restart. So that's a bigger conversation. But the point is, there's a lot of distrust that may already exist within your ERG program. You can help to gain that trust by seeing things through when you commit to helping your ERG leaders. Like I said, it applies on a bigger scale as well, but it also applies even to those small ways that you want to contribute to help your ERG leaders. You need to to help them all the way through, or at least give them a time commitment that you have to dedicate to the project. This way, when you do have to focus on other priorities, that'll already have been communicated with them. Observation is that an act of service to a lot of people could even just be to get their computers to work correctly. Now, maybe not correctly, but maybe to work better. How can you perform an act of service for your ERG leaders? By giving them access to things that they may not have had access to previously, which is once again going to make it easier for them to do their role. Do they need a faster computer? Is that something that you can advocate for them for? Or do you know someone who can advocate for them to help them accomplish that? Do they need upgraded permissions in Slack and Teams and whatever they're using to be able to execute? If so, can you advocate for them? Do they need training for a certain thing, maybe to use your procurement system and they don't know at all how? Granted, that should be included in the SOP, but even then, is there a way that you can connect them with someone who works on that procurement team who can walk them through? These are acts of service that you can do for your ERG leaders. Now, is the time where I'm going to touch on how this applies to me. Now, me personally, I am not a fan of acts of service. And I really like to give these personalized examples because as we go through this, I want you all to think about what love languages, appreciation languages really speak to you and which ones don't. Now, for me, yeah, acts of service, definitely not. I'm really kind of indifferent almost when people do things for me. And sometimes it can even be almost like offensive because as an overthinker, now that someone's doing an act of service for me, especially when they don't ask me beforehand, I'm thinking like, are they trying to give me a hint towards something? Do they think I couldn't have done it myself? It makes me overthink for days and I don't like it. Even if they say, oh, no, I just wanted to help. For me, maybe it's like, workplace trauma from the past and things like that, but it just makes me so uncomfortable. Even then, like I know, for instance, my husband, this is like one of his primary love languages. And he even likes he'll vacuum for me and clean and things like that. And for me, it's just like, thanks. I don't love acts of service. It doesn't speak to me. So therefore, when people do this for me, that's not how I feel appreciated. Once again, we're talking about how we can show ERG leaders appreciation in a way that speaks to them. We might be speaking in a love language consistently, but we might completely be missing the mark with a good chunk of our ERG leaders. Some questions to consider when it comes to acts of service. Saying, what's your preferred deadline on this? That's one that I use a lot personally. This way, when I am helping someone, I understand when they expect it by. So that's a really good one just to kind of establish beforehand so you have a good relationship. Tangible gifts. People can react negatively when it's something that's very generic. Think of like a gift card that's very generic, unless it's personalized. Once again, individualization, personalization is big in general with all these love languages. So you want to be able to give the right gift to the right person. The wrong gift to someone can actually be offensive. An interesting statistic that they had is that 68% of people who were surveyed said that gifts is actually their least valued love language. And only 6% of the people surveyed said that that was their favorite. Now, funny enough, knowing this, why is it that most companies, and then even more so, even most ERG programs lean so heavily into tangible gifts? They lean into the merch, and really that's not people's preferred love language. How are we going to personalize this towards them? Tangible gifts can be touchy because, like I said, you have to know the right gift for the right person, which means that you have to know the person to know what they would like. Do they like music a lot? So then you can get them tickets, or you can at least get them like a Ticketmaster gift card or something like that. What is it that that person values, and how can give them a thoughtful gift? Food is a popular one. Gift cards, like I said, if it's personalized, that can be something. If someone does value experiences, I think a lot of people who value experiences, they might value like a Beyonce ticket. I'm not opposed, just saying. Now granted, but I'm not opposed. I mean, I'll go because I do like shared experiences. But the point is, tangible gifts, making sure that they're relevant to that specific person. Now, if you were to give me personally a ticket to an opera show, It doesn't speak to me. I do like tangible gifts. I would say it's my secondary love language, but because that's not relevant to me, So that's why it has to be very personalized. Now, that being said, let's talk about ERG leader compensation pay. Okay, this is typically where most people think when they think of the gifts. So there's a lot of things. I have feelings on it, as I've expressed a few times before. Just some quick considerations when it comes to the compensation piece, okay? There's a first consideration in terms of how much is a good amount, because there's likely different levels of employees that are serving as ERG leaders. So now what $1,000 might mean to one person might mean something completely different to someone else. So now it's not equitable in terms of how appreciated people are feeling. So that's one consideration. Also, another thing too is that if your program, I kind of touched on this earlier, if your program's in disarray, this is not the first thing that you should lean into, because once again, the ERG leaders, they're here because they love their community. They want to show up for these people. So unfortunately, a lot of companies, I see them where they come to this point where it's like, do we work on our ERG program or do we just compensate our leaders? And a lot of them are leaning into what's easy. They'll just pay their leaders and they hope that that's gonna, cover their eyes long enough so that their term ends and they can just get new ERG leaders in place. Compensating should not take the place of actually putting in the work to make your ERG program better. It should not take that place. And unfortunately, that's largely where the space is right now. From someone who came from support, who was an ERG leader, I understand what financial compensation means. I do think that it is an important aspect. Like I said, really any good ERG leader appreciation strategy should encompass all 5 of these love languages in one way or another. But I'm just saying, if ERG leaders can't even do what they came here to do, that's the main thing that we have to focus on. Yeah. I think the main sentence that I had here is that ERG compensation is not a solution to burnout. So that was like my bar from this section. Also, then it's like, when is enough? Is enough ever enough when it comes to compensating an ERG leader? The mark can be missed so easily when it comes to gifts. For instance, I knew of a company that for an ERG leader who had served for 3 years, they gave them $250. That was the compensation, just to be able to say, oh, we compensate our leads. And if the company is doing something performative like that, I definitely don't co-sign that. But unfortunately, these are the things I'm seeing. So that's why compensation is so tricky. Compensation can also, like in gifts, can also be, I've seen like people talk about stock units and things like that. All cool. I'm down for it. But I'm also more importantly focused on, is the program in a place where we can even start really doubling down on these other aspects of appreciation? Anyway, I think that you all get that. But ask yourself the question, what kind of gifts do you appreciate most? And what gifts that you've been given have really hit the mark for you? All right, last one, physical touch. This is an interesting one, right? How does this show up when it comes to ERG leader appreciation? First of all, disclaimer, because obviously, we're all thinking it. When I'm saying physical touch, it's a red flag because you think of like sexual harassment or even people who have been victims of physical abuse. Touch is such a touchy situation. Me personally, being very deeply engraved in Black culture, where it's like, don't invade my bubble. You might know what I'm talking about. That is another like consideration. Cultural backgrounds. What are people's relationship with physical touch is a really big thing. Have you ever been approached by someone who says though, like, oh, I'm such a big hugger, let me see. Give a reaction in the comments if you're that person who's such a hugger. I see a hand. Yeah, I'm not a hugger. I will just say that. As a matter of fact, when someone approaches me like that, I get very uncomfortable. I do not like being touched at all. My friends know if they're giving everyone a hug, I get a fist bump or maybe a wave, because please don't touch me. That's just how I am personally. I've seen people literally like shrink when someone goes to hug them. When people like give me a pat on the back, I like freeze up because it just makes me very uncomfortable. Now, that being said, physical touch when it comes to ERG leader appreciation is largely knowing when you are in these in-person experiences, when to and when not to engage in appropriate non-sexual physical touch. So knowing how to respect people's boundaries is a big thing so that they're feeling comfortable in these situations. That can be a form of appreciation where they're saying, wow, they're really taking me into consideration. Point is, coming out of all of this, you really want to consider these multiple aspects of appreciation. Now, how do you find out what someone's appreciation love language is? 4 quick ways. Number 1, you have to know what your own languages of appreciation are. So identify what yours are. If you buy the book, they give you like a code to like take the quiz that they made for free, very in depth. So that's one way, but there's a good chance that by you even listening to this, you have a good indicator on what really speaks to you. On the opposite side, understand what doesn't speak to you and how that shows up. You might even be able to start identifying ERG leaders as you go through these and like review the love languages, and you can kind of tell based on previous behaviors what their preferred love languages are and are not. Step number 2, you want to ask. When you onboard your ERG leaders, you can ask them to rate on a scale from 1 to 10 and ask them about each of these languages. Don't just say in general, how do you prefer to be appreciated? Because who can answer that, if they don't have any context? So list out each of them on a scale from 1 to 10, how well you feel appreciated by gifts. This way, you can really be able to tailor and personalize your strategy towards each person. Step 3, ask what their goals are for context. We talked about this earlier. This way, you're able to provide them appreciation in a way that speaks to them most or in terms of the goal that they're trying to meet. Step 4, survey for feedback. So as you implement these strategies, you want to, at some point, maybe like on an annual basis, just ask people, do a pulse check. How do we do in these aspects? What are some ways that we could have done better when it comes to showing you that you feel appreciated? But truly, I'm telling you, I've experienced it myself. I don't speak on things that I have not gone through myself. When you have an ERG appreciation strategy that touches on all 5 of these, it's almost going to be like the ERG leaders are like feeling overwhelmed with, in the best way, like with love. They are going to feel so appreciated because you're guaranteed to have touched their love language in some way. Another good tip is to be observant. So as you just watch people, like I said, you've had previous experience with your ERG leaders, you'll be able to see historically, like you'll be able to kind of guesstimate what their love language is. Obviously ask still, but you can also just be observant in general. If people say things like offer to hang out with their colleagues frequently, there's a good chance that quality time is big for them. If they're always asking for your opinion on things or they want you to check something, they likely appreciate words of affirmation. So pay attention. And then a final tip was to listen to their complaints throughout the year, because the things that they complain about are likely going to speak to directly what their love language is. The last point that I'm trying to make, primary love language that you have is also 9 times out of 10 your primary offended language. I don't know if that's the word, offended language, but you speaking to someone or you not speaking to someone in their love language or like doing the opposite. So like I said, quality time is something I really appreciate. So when I'm not included and I start to experience that FOMO, I feel like really not appreciated. So just keep that in mind. Like I said, it can show up when you're working with your ERG leaders and you kind of notice that there's some uncomfortability. Maybe you can lean into what their love language is.